If you did do the knowledge papers, the F1, 2 and 3, ask yourself, how well did you perform? Did you score 90% on those papers, which is a very good score? Did you score 50% on those papers? Especially when we come to look at the financial and maybe cost management papers, which feed from F2 and F3. If you only scored 50% on F2, only 50% on F3, then that will have some bearing on these later papers such as F5, F7 and F9, because those papers do pick up on a lot of the knowledge from the earlier papers. F1, not so much of an issue because it doesn't feed directly into the other papers, certainly at this level. But F2 and F3, you need to have done reasonably well. So what we would suggest is, if your mark wasn't that high, or maybe if you've been exempted, you should go and practice the pilot papers again for F3 and F2. And we give a link to those pilot papers just to bring you back up to date. Or as I say, if you were exempt, then just to give you an idea of those earlier syllabus, the F2, the F3 syllabus. Find out how much knowledge you've got, because it is important. They do feed into these later papers. If you don't have that basic knowledge from the lower level papers, you will find it more and more difficult when you come to do the F5, the F7 and F9 papers in particular. So with these skills papers, they are professional exams. ACCA is a professional accountancy body setting professional accountancy exams. So you've got to be professional in your outlook, both in terms of your study and when it comes to actually sitting the exams. You can't go into these exams ill prepared. You've got to spend a good 3 to 4 months preparing yourself for the exams, going through the study materials, working through past exam questions, and then setting yourself up for the exams that we're talking about at the moment in December 2013. Those of you who took the knowledge papers F1, 2 and 3 may well remember that all of those questions are multiple choice questions. In your skills papers, F4 to F9, there is no multiple choice. They're all 10 mark or bigger questions that, depending upon the paper that you're doing, the question marks range from a 10 mark up to a 25 mark question, and even in some cases actually a 30 mark question. There's no choice within these papers. Each paper is 100 marks compulsory paper. So you don't have an option of selecting a particular question and ignoring another question. You have got to do every question in every one of these exams. Some questions you'll find, certainly the bigger ones, the 25 mark, the 30 mark, are broken down into sections. And it's important that you answer every part of every question. If, for example, there's a 25 mark question, 5 marks don't answer, then obviously you can't get any marks for that part of a question. If you attempt to answer a question, you might get 1 out of 5. That 1 out of 5 is better than 0 out of 5. And you might find that that 1 mark takes you from 49 through to a pass at 50. So try and discipline yourself. Much of these exams is about discipline. Discipline yourself to answer every part of every question. The exam then is a 3-hour exam, plus you get a 15 minutes what ACCA call reading time, where you are allowed to read the exam in advance of actually starting your answers. You can read, you can make comments on the question paper, you can highlight text on the question paper. What you can't do is you can't, in that 15 minutes, write into your answer book. But you can write on the question paper, as I say, you can highlight. But it's important to read the questions and read the requirements. When this first came about by the ACCA, it's fairly new. It's only about 5 or 6 years ago since they introduced this 15 minutes of reading time. I set for my students a task of reading the exam paper. And many of those students, for 14 of those 15 minutes, basically twiddled their thumbs. They looked around, they did nothing. It is so important that you use the facility that is given to you by the ACCA. So read the question paper, identify which questions you're comfortable with, which you're not comfortable with. Make notes, highlight particular points on there. So please do use that 15 minutes of reading time. Again, that is for all of these skill papers. All of the papers will be your understanding and application of knowledge. The F1, 2 and F3 papers, they were the knowledge papers. Now you're being tested on a little bit more than actual knowing the information. You've got to be able to understand and apply the information that you've learned. Some papers will be predominantly wordy papers, such as the law paper, F4. Some papers will be mainly numbers, the tax paper, F6. And some there'll be a combination, such as F7. Again, there's a little bit of flexibility on there. F6 tax, predominantly numbers, but there will be some written responses required.